education in general is about self-sovereignty, is about liberty, and is about how to think about yourself and what you want to do, where you want to go based on it. Web3 is probably the last resort or the last societal or the beginning of the new societal linchpin where those thoughts are most vibrant. And that is where we can go back to the values that we adhered to, maybe lost, and retrieve it back.
That was Agwn from Ludium, a Web3 education venture in Korea and co-organizer of ETH Seoul. On this podcast, we go on a wild journey as we try to unpack how he got into crypto, why is he doing education, and how Near has grown so much in Korea. We go on an incredible exploration of Korea's past and all the elements that make this a unique place for crypto. We cover everything from history, philosophy, education, technology, user experience, and more. We take many tangents, and at times it may seem random, but trust me, all the storylines weave in together quite nicely towards the end. I hope you enjoy this as much as I do, and without further ado, let's listen from Agwn. Bye. Hello friends, welcome back to another Wild User Interviews podcast with me, AVB. Today, it is an absolute honor to have with me, Agwn.
Agwn.
What's fuck? I've been saying this wrong for weeks now. In my defense, as you probably see on the title, AGWN.
Yes.
There's some letters missing there.
That's Greek. So yeah, Greek. Yeah, W is supposed to be Omega. Okay. I guess I could come up with my story of how I came to be Agwn. So I'm Agwn. I run a Web3 education onboarding station community in Korea. And the name Ludium initially comes from Latin. It comes from the opening Homo Ludens. It's Johan Huizinga. He's a historian during World War II, I think Dutch. He wrote a book named Homo Ludens, which is like Homo sapiens. His thesis is revolving around the humans are born to play. Ludens, lud means to play.
Nice.
Yeah.
See, I was going to claim my ignorance on this being something Korean.
Oh.
But you've just made me realize that you're a fake Korean.
Well, I studied Latin and Greek when I was in college, so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
that's a really interesting thread because Rim, who you've met, she's with Proximity now near Korea.
Yeah.
She also studied in Belgium and she studied philosophy.
Yeah.
So for people listening to this podcast, most likely they've come into the ecosystem since I recorded my podcast with her. I think it was like the third podcast or something. We went on a beautiful tangent, our philosophy.
Yeah. She's amazing, by the way. Yeah, I was going to mention that you are one of the inspiring figure who got me into the ecosystem. And she was one of the others. Yeah.
I think we're a power couple. We should have an arranged marriage.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, to go back to the Ludium and the Agwn. So I was reading that book, and so Lud means to play. And when I was coming up with the name for the project that I was doing, it incidentally means play and school at the same time. Like the word school itself is from Greek etymology, school, which is both to play and to be in a gymnasium or the educational institution. So yeah, and the EU, which is like probably familiar to a lot of crypto people, Ethereum. EU means land or like the territory. So land of play, land of school. That was where Ludium came from. And when I was coming up with the name for Ludium, I was trying to set up a Web3 identity for myself. And one of the words that came within that book was Agwn, which means community or a competitive play.
So that's not your real name?
No, it's not my real name. It is an identity that I gave to myself. Yeah.
Oh, that is some real gangster, like Anon-ish. Because I'm AVB.
Yeah.
Which everyone knows me by AVB. Like they've seen my face. I'll probably share a photo of this podcast afterwards. But not many people actually know my name.
Yeah.
So it's like a really nice pseudonymity where people know you, but they don't know who you are kind of thing.
The identity that you present to yourself or that you are trying to be or trying to live up to, name is one of it. And then how you live up to it or your deeds are the other features of it. Yeah, I get what you.
In a very Greek way, yes. I think that in modern times, we can probably identify a third category.
Element, yes.
around the visual perception. If you look at something like Gray Layer 1, which is probably an interesting sort of glimpse into what the metaverse may look like, I think that having so much flexibility around the character that you build, it doesn't even need to have human features, makes it very interesting.
In a way, that speaks a lot to the whole phenomenology of PREs and the NFTs. And that's like the beginning of the like visualization, or I would say senses. Visual is one thing for me, like all the other different senses also come together. For me, I'm usually more prone to auditory senses rather than visual aspects of it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in terms that the whole prospect of metaverse is to try to bring back the senses of digital reality, so we say, into commingled with the reality as we see it.
I don't know if you may be too young. I was too young, but I had an older sister and I got the width of it. It's like a cultural thing now. Apparently MySpace, you could customize your MySpace, including audio. So when people went to your MySpace, they would listen to the music or whatever you put on. And these were the times where they were like emo teenagers. So some MySpaces, you'd go to them and it just fucking starts blasting this horrible metal, like very intense bass. Makes me wonder if there is scope or if there's demand for something like that. We went from that hyper customized era to a very standardized era. In some ways, people could argue that is why Facebook succeeds. They were like, look, people have no idea about user experience or user interface. Let's just create one neatly packaged experience that is the same for everyone, and we just populate and it works. But as we enter into the era of AI, and even if we look at something like near blockchain operating system, components, people being able to really mix and match, maybe we will enter the time where we can have our space in the metaverse and have some music with it.
I lived in Korea, so I'm less familiar with MySpace, but there's a very similar concept in Korea called Agwn. Whenever there's a concept of metaverse that comes out, Sign World is always mentioned. It's like you get a room of yourself. In your room, you get a character, and then you can put your utensils. It's basically like an NFT. I was actually talking to the founder of that company. She was in 2000. She was actually there's an article about Cyber founders discussing whether that digital property is a property of a user or the property of the company itself. So that concept, without the NFT and the whole blockchain, they were something that, because there was a digital currency called Totori, which is like a Agwn. So you have 1
So
which is like $1 like that, and you can buy stuff. And then Second Life and all the metaverse that were in early 2000s had that kind of concept, but it was just without the needs to actualize the property of individuals or decentralized payment system. So we call it the whole value transfer of blockchain. That's
How old is this platform? Is it still current? What year roughly was the article pondering on the ownership released?
It was early 2000s, which is coincidental with the whole MySpace, because like before Facebook dominated the social network and Facebook and Instagram dominated the whole social network, there was that aspect of like early 2000s. That service was, I think, got stopped, and then it was trying to reverse with some of the blockchain elements to it, but it didn't work that well. So I think it's gone history now, but yeah, there was that.
Interesting. Because I remember as a young child, I was very prolific, very into The Sims, and I bought several of the packages, including the dating one, which is weird for a kid. Roller Coaster Tycoon, I loved. There was one, I can't remember, the one where you build cities.
Minecraft, maybe, or
I never got into Minecraft.
really?
Yeah, and I grew up in Venezuela, so it was actually the early days of buying stuff online, but also there was an extra layer of the logistics of shipping things to Venezuela. So I was a kind of kid where I would literally do all the research and put a plan in place. And then my parents were like, yeah, my dad, we'll trust you with this. I did get scammed once. I bought a mobile phone and a Nokia. Those were the good days, and I got scammed. But the games, it was cool. Like I'd ship it to like Miami, and then there's this company that sends it over to Venezuela, and then you pick it up from a postal office. But yeah, this is an interesting topic, and we're like less than 10 minutes in, and we've already gone in a beautiful tangent because a lot of people have become dismissive of the metaverse. But my theory is that it's easy for people to become dismissive, and even I am a very harsh critic, when you put the blockchain first. Because a blockchain as a tool and as a technology doesn't really stand for anything. And if you put the blockchain first, usually what people put second is how to make money. So now you're like 2 layers deep with the wrong approach. But if you were actually to put the product first and the user experience first, then you start looking at it with completely different lenses, because you realize that this new set of tools, being the blockchain, actually gives you superpowers to expand on a product or an idea that we had before. If you think of something like The Sims, the easiest way for me to explain the metaverse to someone would be, imagine if The Sims had the ability for anyone to create items and sell them. You can create an item, fantastic designer in Korea. I can buy it in Venezuela. We're transacting real money or whatever, magic money in this world online. And there's so much you can build in. You could literally have designer assets. There's a limited amount of these couches, and you could build all these stories around these assets. Oh my God, digital Kim Kardashian fucked in that couch. But then tell that kind of story. That's where the value comes from. It's never the technology
and the whole attachment.
No one cares about the technology. We need to have something that draws us in, and the user needs to make it theirs. This is my cap now.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I like about Metaverse is, as you mentioned, is that it's very sense, it's very visual, it's very auditory, it's very like touching in the sense that I literally means touch. Could be.
I don't know which metaverses you've been in.
But yeah, that whole aspect of sensory impulses and being able to feel it and being able to be in it, I think is very important. So I am a very for the sensory experience, but I'm a guy who's much more into the conceptual things or the underlying value of the entire phenomena. Well, I guess that's what drew me into crypto more than the metaverse, because like I seeing things and experiencing things, but at the same time, I usually try to sit down and contemplate what that really means to me, more so than the immediate like sensory impulses that come into me. That's what I really like about the whole blockchain and the metaverse intertwining. But at the same time, as you mentioned, it like it's got to be chicken and the egg problem, right? I mean, there's got to be technology of both at some point to be intertwined, but at the same time, more people like to feel things rather than just to like me to sit down and think.
It probably goes back to that element of customization that we mentioned before,
Right.
and how different products, their success or failure really comes down to how the experience can adapt to the user. Each is very individual characteristics. Some people are more creative, some are more analytical,
Exactly.
some are more about experiences, some are more about fixed, predictable things.
Yeah.
The first question
Okay.
that I
We're getting to real shit now.
the first question that I ask every guest is, and we've started unpacking it, but I want to put it to you formally. How did you get into the wonderful world of crypto? Young, bright man from Korea, could have potentially done anything. Why crypto?
It goes back to like my youth, when I was very young. So when I was in like fifth grade in elementary school, which was probably when I was like 11-ish in age, I got to a point where I was really fed up with Korean society.
At 11 years old.
Yeah, 11 years old. It was it's a very vivid experience too, because during elementary school, there's usually after school cleanup session. Designated students take turns to clean up the classroom after class, which is fine with me because it's an ecosystem, right? Classroom is an ecosystem, and to be self-sustainable, someone's got to do the job of cleaning. So I'm fine with that. But the question that I had to myself one day was that students are doing the cleaning. Why are teachers sitting down and just oversighting? There could be reasons for it. There are some obvious reasons of, if not hierarchy, but authority, or at least the division of work, so to say. which is fine with me. But one of those days when I was young, I had that question. I asked it to the teacher. And then that day I got whacked, like literally whacked like that. So what got to me is that physical violence as a thing, I won't say I'm entirely opposed to it in the sense that physical violence is a way of, if not subduing, at least exercising your opinion, or a way of, if not persuasion, at least a very forceful way of conjecturing yourself. What's fine. Physical violence happened. But the problem that I had was that, is it so wrong to ask that question? Is it so wrong to ask why it is that way? And then it got to me that in Korean society, it's impossible to ask that question. So that led me to go to United States and eventually to attend college. And in States, when I was attending college, I went to, you mentioned philosophy. I went to liberal arts, which means we read dead people and old books, like for the entirety of 4 years. So while doing that, it came to my mind that all these dead people and all these old folks had similar questions in their own time, in their own way, about humanity, about themselves, about the society that they're exposed to. How should I live, and why are things this way, whether it be physical phenomena or human values just in general? Through going through all this, it came to my mind that, and the entire experience of my college year gave me hope that humans don't have to live that way, or society doesn't necessarily have to be that rigid, or could have room for discussions and liberty, and people can live free if they choose to, and when the situation permits. So the whole basis of that, at least, is though you need the right kind of community, right kind of setting in which those opinions can be expressed, listened, discussed, and based on a certain type of understanding, be able to come to another consensus of a sort. But the question from my mind is that, how could that community come about? How are we going to make society more liberating for each other based on certain values? That was possible in my college years, I think, because it was a very small community, and it was based on a very strict consensus that we're reading these kind of books for 4 years, and we are dedicating ourselves to that. But in a more scalable society as an open world, it becomes much more difficult, because there's so much complexity of values conflicting each other.
And so many illiterate people in general.
That's one way, but, or I'm illiterate, or people don't generally want to read book to begin with. So
Yeah, that is a really weird phenomenon that I have these days when I read a book, or even when I read documentation. I get distracted because I keep thinking, oh my God, this is expressed so well. And the ideas here are so powerful. I wish more people knew this. And it's probably a dire sign over time where I'm like, I need to make a TikTok about this so that more people know. But it's obviously possible to capture an entire line of thinking and all the information that goes into making a good argument in a 30-second TikTok. It's great that these people, while dead, remain alive in books.
To add on to your point, I believe change in media, like from like books to movies to series like YouTube 15 minutes to TikTok, I think that's just inevitable. So that can go by. But the fundamental question that goes along with it is that, how are those, like, how much thoughts are put into it? And do people have enough time to immerse into it and be able to really discuss it?
My issue with a lot of things these days is because we're hyper connected, it's very easy to fall into groupthink. And when you fall into groupthink, it is much easier to go for the lowest common denominator. It is true that as a distribution channel, new media has immense power. I just don't like that we are converging towards the lowest common denominator while almost pushing out the highest common denominator. People saying books have no future. I'm like, we may start progressing if we just have TikToks.
The centralization of ideology in a way that, is it through this, it might be through distribution channel, or it might be through Medium, or it might be through just thought leaders or a few leaders that are just converging into it. And as you mentioned, by doing so, people become least common denominator of that thought. For example, Christianity, I like reading Bible, and Christianity, I think, is a great, not just as a religion, but as a philosophy, but as a history. It's a great book for me. Bible is a book, really good book. But the question that I have for Christians, for example, is that, do you read Bible? Right? I mean, you hear Bible from a priest, which is fine. You can have filtered sources into it, but do you really read it, and do you really think about it on your own? That, I think, is really some way of touching on to your point of centralization.
Yeah, it's something that should be relatable to people in this field. In history, I studied liberal arts at Agwn. In history, we talk about first-hand sources, and even if you go to law, you've got like different levels of evidence, or whether you saw something, or whether you
Direct evidence,
or whether someone said they saw something. Like, you can't give it the same weight. So yeah, it's definitely challenging to have most of reality mediated through these lenses, which is interesting enough. It takes us back to blockchain as a way to almost timestamp what was true, what the original source was. But I'd like to take it back to your college days, and there's two things that really caught my attention. We can address them one by one, or talk about one and forget about the other one, as I often do. Whichever comes first. The first one is, what were some of the thinkers and dead people, books that had the most impact to you during college? And the second one is, I'm a student of history, but the more you study history, the more you realize you don't really know or any elements about Korean history in particular that creates, it's like a binary model to me, whereby the country is free, feels advanced, can see a lot of progress, but there's obviously some historical and cultural elements that may pull it in one direction or another.
Definitely.
I thought it was really interesting when you mentioned the cleaning session after school. From my trip in Korea, I've identified many things that I've heard about overseas, but from Japan. And that's when you realize that like Korea and Japan have a lot of things in common. I can tell you in my school, not a representative sample, but take it as it may be, it was the opposite. Kids are entitled, you pay people to clean, and you treat them like shit. And you have a multi-tiered society. So you have the teachers sitting over the kids, and the kids sitting over the cleaners, and it creates a very different culture. So it's interesting that even though you were smacked and subdued in negative ways, just having the notion of you clean after your space, it's kind of cool.
That notion itself, interesting. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So let me get back to your first question.
Because the issue for you was, why is that person who also shares this space not participate? I don't think that your issue was, why am I cleaning this? Dude, I can go.
Yeah, that's the question that I had. Yes.
Go to any high school in South America and make the kids clean after school, and they'd be like, what the fuck is this? And first question, thinkers and that people.
Yeah. I used to say that I have 3 books that I read every year since my freshman year in college. So one's Plato's Republic. The other is Siji from the Ancient History of China. It's a very grandiose book. I really love history. You mentioned history. So I love Thucydides, Plutarch, and Artus, and like Leviticus, and Levy, all the discourses on Levy by Machiavelli, all kind of stuff. But I believe that Chinese historian to be the most grandiose in terms of depth and in terms of the volume and the amount of work that he puts in. Until like the last year or two, more like 3 years ago, the third book was Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So Plato, Chinese historian, and Nietzsche. But third book, I don't read it as much. These days I take more time to read all the different like crypto articles and the recent ones.
As a perfect segue for the second question, fun fact for you, Nietzsche, which I'm not going to try to pretend I'm pronouncing correctly.
Right.
He's also top 3 for Ring.
I would believe that,
who also grew up in Korea. And by living overseas, I think went through a very interesting cultural awakening. Rediscovering Korea when coming back. I'll put the second question to you.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the elements of Korean history that have shaped that? And the reason why I ask, is because most people that go into crypto have a very strong drive that despite what Gary Gensler might think, motherfucker, it's actually not driven by money. And it's actually not even like a hobbyist, cool technology kind of thing. It is driven by a much deeper sense of this is a path forward. Whatever the historical mess, baggage, and legacy institution, once you see the potential of the technology, it is really drawing in a lot of people that are motivated to make it happen. And that's the vision that we sometimes struggle to illustrate because people are fucking flipping apes. But yeah, I'd be really curious to see how that history plays into your story.
I think Korea has a very diverse history from the very beginning, but to mention the most recent ones. So at the end of the last time dynasty of a Korean peninsula, which was Joseon Dynasty, it was the time.
What period are we talking about?
Like end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century. So yeah, that's when the whole imperialism or the colonialism was going into its peak, right before the dawn of the First World War, and Japan was subdued by America, and then they modernized to a new country. But Korea was going through that transition. That was the period when Korea was greatly divided because there was a traditional dynasty still in hand. There were young, newly thinking, study abroad, thoughtful people who some of them betrayed the country because they, literally pull up the Chosun dynasty, hand it over to Japan. Some of them were similar. They were also erudite and more experienced more abroad, but at the same time they wanted Korea to be preserved. So those kind of forces were going on at that time. Something similar happened during 1970s in Korea as well. That was when the democracy was trying to sprout. And eventually, I personally believe, my father will probably try to kill me for saying this, but I personally believe Korea gave up on democracy and just chose another path. So
during 70s or more recent?
1970s. Yes. So the reason why I'm starting from like the beginning of the 20th century is that were driving forces that moved all the way to the Korean War. So after Japanese annexation ended, there were like those who tried to seek independence. Actually, North Korea, the founder of North Korea, was one of those independence liberator in Manchuria and in China.
So just in case some listeners don't know, it's actually me and it doesn't know. Assuming I'm a 5-year-old that discovered Korea exists yesterday. Right. When you mentioned the transition from the imperial and colonialism in the 20th, late 19th, 20th century, is that imperialism or colonialism from which country? Because in other countries like Hong Kong, Singapore had British colony. What was the situation in Korea?
For a brief period of time, there was America and there was Russia, but mostly Japan. Japanese annexation happened officially on 1919 or 1906, 05, anyway, 03, whichever. But it happened much before during 18, like 90s, 70s, stuff like that. So
the mention is your previous podcasts. Hopefully people go and check it out. There is a fantastic book. It's a biography of Lee Kuan Yew from Singapore. I think I learned more from that book than from an actual history course. And he details in very vivid level of detail the Japanese occupation and that him studying law in the UK. And once again, like these were events that set Singapore in a very specific course. And you may even say that then being kicked out of Malaysia was even an attempt from Malaysia to preserve its own identity and keep us south. At what point does North Korea split or what the...
So what after Japanese annexation, it was 1909, I think, 1909 it happened. So there was like different forces of people who were trying to subdue to the Japanese government, whereas others were trying to seek independence. That they were usually working not inside the Korean peninsula, but usually like different parts of China. And some of them were actually in America. One of the first president of Korea, who later became first president of Korea, was doing some of that work in America. So when Second World War was ending. Those forces were trying to come back and try to do independence work. But at the end, eventually, it wasn't by, for example, South Korea did not find its independence by its own force, which is very funny in a way because France, after Normandy, the American liberated them, or the American ended the Second World War, but they still consider the De Gaulle and the French government, early French government, as the legitimate higher or the legitimate independence force. But in Korea, that never happened because they never came to a consensus of who is actually the legitimate throne or legitimate government in Korea. I think that was one of that conflicting force that I was mentioning.
Who are the contestants?
There were three. Actually, North Korea is one of the contestants because North Korean, the Kim Il-sung, as I said, they came with Soviet Russia later, but they at least had the force that were driving themselves to, if not occupy, at least liberate northern part of Korea. So they were actual entity. Funny thing about the end of the Second World War and Korean independence is that the treaty signed for the Korean War, the end of Korean War, and that's when the Korea officially split, and that's when Korean government was officialized. In that document, South Korea is not in there. America, China, North Korea signed that treaty, the end of Korean War. The whole Korean War is extension after the liberation, because 1945, I think it was the liberation, and 1956 or something like that, it was Korean War. During that time, they were trying to figure out like who's doing what, who's where, stuff like that.
That is very interesting. I'm trying to see if there's some principles that we could try to distill, once again, to feed back into what drives people here. And I've noted many times that Seoul is one of those cities that I feel like it doesn't really sleep. You can see people just hustling. It's a very different vibe from New Zealand.
I imagine. I've never been to New Zealand, but yeah.
Yeah, people are chilling. There's nothing that you're chilling. If a person in 2023 hears about North Korea, they would be very quick to associate with like very isolated regime, depending on how you look at it, weak economically, etc. And if they were to hear about South Korea in 2023, we've gotten to the point where some people would even get offended if you ask which Korea. There is only South Korea. Economically, culturally, you've got K-pop, you've got... So I didn't know about the treaty in South Korea not being in there, but
still it's not there.
Still it's not there. And I can't help but imagine that setup always being placed as the underdog and having to prove that your model or the chosen path is the right one, and constantly having to legitimize or rise up to whatever standard there is.
I think it affects greatly. That's whenever there's a legislation passing in Korea. Like funny thing, like you're mentioning Gary Gensler, right? SEC recently.
Fucking Gary. Fuck Gary.
And Gary, I don't know if it's SEC or Gary, I can't even tell anymore. But Matic and Solana, or what was the other one? The other one could.
There's a list of about 13 of them.
Yeah.
Across 2 different lawsuits, Filecoin.
Filecoin? I mean,
allegedly near.
Is it in the list?
It is.
Is it? That's funny.
In one of the lawsuits, maybe the problem with this lawsuit is that one side is alleging unregistered security trading, and they're looking at staking platform,
blah, blah, blah.
But the other side of the claims is commingling of funds and I guess more inappropriate business practices. That would be more on the FTX side. Money, like private money being funneled in different ways. And the reason why making that distinction is important is because if you look at the unregistered security argument, to me it is very disingenuous, because even if these exchanges reach an agreement with the SEC tomorrow and they come forward and register and they are allowed to trade securities, guess what? They can only trade registered securities. So the SEC seems to have deliberately not gone after these foundations, because they would have to prove in court whether they're securities or not. They skipped that step They went to the exchange and said, you can't trade unregistered securities. They'll probably sign a deal tomorrow, trade registered securities. But none of those coins are registered. And where things get very paradoxical is, okay. So when a foundation wants to come forward and register as a security, they can't because it's decentralized. It's very,
it's a funny catch-22 situation.
lawyers are going to make billions on this. SEC is probably
No doubt.
I'm thinking they're going back into the law.
Anyway, yeah. So going back to the reason why I was mentioning about the security is that recently Korean security exchange equivalent government body announced right after SEC announced something, they announced this like similar statement. They say it's on their own decision or blah blah blah, but it seems very obvious that like Korean government legislation tend to follow on the one hand America very closely, on the other hand either China or Europe, but it is very hard for them to come up with their own. That identity is I really entangled in there.
Okay, this may be a terrible analogy. For people listening, the way that a creative mind works and a creative mind with ADHD works is you get the spark of an idea, and as you entertain it, it keeps evolving. It's like the Photoshop generative AI now. You get a glimpse of an image, and then you click expand, and more of the image keeps generating. So sometimes the full image may not be what you were expecting, but we'll run with it. Look, sometimes I think about it as being Hispanic, culturally in Venezuela and living in Australia. You don't try to speak Spanish in Australia because you're surrounded by English speaking. And you don't try to go to a nightclub and you get pissed off because they're not playing Despacito. Although sometimes they do. You need to be very pragmatic about what it takes to survive and thrive in that circumstance. And that's why I wanted to bring up history, because South Korea, if you look at a map, I could probably throw a rock and hit North Korea. It's like, it is so close to an area that most of the world associates as a hotspot and possible conflict. Over time, all the podcasts that I've listened to it and content I've consumed, this is a very interesting deterrent against a war in North Korea. You know what it is?
What is it?
Russia and China do not want to have millions of North Korean refugees going into their countries. So the minute something happens there, Russia and China come in. And then you've got Japan across the road. We're here before. So you're like, we're friends because we're friends against them. But we're also no friends because you used to be. It's like your ex, and you've got to keep. You got to go, not in a good way. You don't want to keep your ex, but you've got to keep together. See, this is the example, not the best analogy, but so if you were to place anyone in the same situation, I don't think that would come up with a different scenario.
Yeah.
If you give me those options, we've got these crazy people there. The other two crazy over there are psycho ex down the road. Fuck it. The Americans are fantastic. They're far away. They're bringing some stability, whatever. They've got some submarines with nukes and shit. We can be friends with them.
So as you're saying, it is understandable to an extent because it was a survival tactic and it worked pretty well when you're going back to how you're mentioning about North Korea and South Korea, the economical differences now. And South Korea did a astonishing job. They were diligent, hardworking, and they made what is called miracle upon river. They've done it. And then it's now, if not the most stable, it now became some kind of an entity that has a footholding, if not globally, at least in its domestic or in its way of beyond surviving. And got to that point, I believe. So
I see a lot of similarities. The more that I learn, I see a lot of similarities between South Korea and Israel.
yes,
Economic miracles, surrounded by adversity. It's a country that has to reinvent itself and stay relevant and grow in its presence. And this is going to tie very nicely. And we will move into that. We'll have a toilet break and then we'll move into that, into what Web3 is in Korea in general. The question that I wanted to ask you, but we'll just blend it all together in the sake of time. I know you're a busy person. Do you think that if some of the concepts that you encountered in college, which some of these books and ideas are very old, if those were more widely distributed, available, and discussed by the general populace, that some, if not most of the conflicts of the last century have been avoided. And that is a segue into why Ludium and why education in Web3. We're back.
Yeah, we're back in.
Nice, refreshed, pissed.
So, yeah, your question was two parts. If you were asking me whether if Web2 or the conventional world or the public could have discussed the ideas that I was talking about, the dead people or the liberals more, would have world been better? And then the other thing was why Web3 and why education in Web3.
We may even cheat and travel across time and space and add to the first idea, almost like the second category. Could these ideas and ability to think and reason through problems have avoided some of these challenges? Second one would be, could blockchain technology or the ability for people to coordinate action could have solved some of these problems? Because I think that either one would lead to why Ludium and why education.
Yeah, I think it comes back to your first question of why did I come into crypto? Because I didn't finish that question to begin with, but yeah, as I said, like during the college, my question was that, and why I got into crypto is really entangled with your question right now, because people won't read books. Just by books are there and they're great ideas and there are values that were set like 2000 years ago. And if we just live steadfast to it, we would have been so much better, but we just don't do it. The thing about it is that we can't enforce it. The whole premise of those ideas is that it is about self-sovereignty and is about being liberal and being true to yourself and doing what you believe is right and try to figure out your own things. The thing is, in this conventional world, I personally believe that it's much more difficult because the society was set, the classroom example that I was mentioning, it's very hard to question and it's very hard to go back to your origin or be true to yourself. That's why I was drawn to Web3 and crypto, not just because of its technology, but at least it had that onset or the vibrance and people around it was tending towards it, whether it be because of the decentralization or whether it be Propon's ideology or some other factors that are involved with it. People are that minded to begin with. And the transfer of value, the technology itself is enhancing that feature by reducing intermediaries and direct transfer of values, even though it is still up in the air whether that technology alone will be the groundwork for the better society or the going back to the origin.
It definitely comes with age. And something that I find hilarious is my dad, born in 1954, same as Steve Jobs, same as Bill Gates, same as there's a very distinguished 1954 generation.
Boomer generation, yes. My father's that age too. Actually.
Yeah. The timing of them being in college and the computers just coming online, it was just like, it maps very nicely. Malcolm Gladwell has a very good book about that. I saw a photo of him studying in Canada, in Ottawa. Long hair, topless, sitting on top of a car. It was summer of love. Everyone's high.
70s, yes.
And what I told people is the hippies of the 70s are the conservatives of today.
Yeah, exactly.
Republicans, Tories, whatever. So something happened in their lifetime, or something happened in the lifetime of an individual that your perception of reality starts to change. And I never disclose my age, but people can probably figure it out by everything I've done and when. I'm at that stage now where when I was 20, we're all doing the same thing. But when you hit 30, you start to realize some people have a mortgage and kids and a career, and some people are unemployed and going to raves. And these are very broad generalizations, but like I said, it highlights the self-sovereignty aspect. And we've got these really interesting dynamics whereby we want to maximize for that freedom and options, but we're not so quick to own our decisions or the outcome. And this becomes more pronounced over time. That's why I think that with social media, it's a choose your own adventure, but I have definitely seen almost like a resurgence of trying to capture in a very vivid way, a sensory way, how different paths look. For instance, if you look at the biohacking community, it's very interesting to me to see a growing community of people that are very mindful about what they eat, about exercise. They track progress. It's called the quantified self movement. And if you were to look at people that are very successful in different fields, you could probably map a lot of habits and routines, ethics, and values that go into it. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, a lot of these people actually read books. There is a book that I read in 2019, just before the pandemic, perfect time, called Deep Work. And I was fascinated, for good and bad reason, at how simple the premise of the book is. If you want to get shit done, real shit, unique, new, differentiated shit, you have to unplug and do deep work. If you spend all your day answering emails and tweets and whatnot, it's just noise. You're never going to be different in it. Nothing's ever going to change. You need that space to really mull over ideas.
Yes.
And this really comes down to the lowest common denominator. It's easy for people to get by with the noise every day if we just see other people doing that. So we need to have visibility into the people doing deep work and hopefully be inspired by it. It's shit because whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, the market has a way to slap people around into where their choices send them. I think that this is where the blockchain component comes in. If you were to look around the world and you assume that everyone is self-sovereign and it is switched on and they're going to make all the best choices to be super successful, the reality is that in most of the countries around the world, regardless of the choices that you make, it is your environment that constrains you. Most likely corruption, shit governments, whatever, crime. And that's when people get excited. So it's almost like a self-realization journey. And if you look at the Bitcoin mags, Bitcoin community in general, they're very raw to those principles. Like, not your keys, not your coins.
Right.
This is not a bank. This is not the nanny state. You have to take ownership of your money. The further we go along, it is getting more user-friendly. But I think, or I'd like to think, for the truly decentralized projects, we just keep building on top of those principles. Be like, okay, you need to take ownership of the shit you do on chain. It is your money. You have access to every contract and all the data. And we will liberate you from the constraints of the geographic world or that your surroundings may have put on you. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess I can build on top of it. That's why I like decentralization and diversity or plurality aspect of it. Balaji, one of the
Oh my God.
that were saying, yeah.
Did you read that when I was in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Did you cheat? You're a cheater, liar, stealer.
Like one of the podcasts that Balaji did that I really liked about him saying was that you can't build. You can build centralized custodial services, or as you're saying, user-friendly, a little more convenient services on top of a decentralized technology, but you can't do the other way around. That's why the fundamental basis layer of things need to stay decentralized, because that gives you the freedom and the choice on which you can be a community for those who are trying to stay more lax. If you're going to Bahamas, for example, and then if you just want to stay on a beach with a little straw hats, you don't want to do all your works on your own and build all that straw hats on yourself. You went there to enjoy the beaches, and for that, you need services to be provided and conveniences and transportation and all that kind of infrastructure already there. But
these are the things that you could probably find a literally unlimited number of examples. I would have come up with a different one. The Bahamas one with the straw hats is a bit weird. But this is where people in the real world get frustrated with blockchain. And they're like, why are you guys so single-threaded? Why is the obvious shit in the real world not present in the blockchain world? If you go to the Bahamas, the simplest way to say it is someone's holiday is someone else's work day.
Exactly.
And you need to have that synergy on if there's no fat Americans spending money in the island and if there's no people providing services, it doesn't work. So in blockchain is the same. Look, there's been a few high profile cases going back to Quadrica X, Canadian exchange. The founder mysteriously died in India, in a region that is well known for faking death certificates. And he took the private keys of the exchange with him. Most recently, there was the multi-chain bridge. The founder disappeared. and
disappeared every time. It just disappears. Yeah.
he was the one with access controls to some core infrastructure, and a bunch of assets are compromised. The simplest example there is if the whole team gets in a plane to go to whatever rave orgy somewhere in the Caribbean, and the plane crashes, is the protocol still going to work? That's decentralization. Maybe you should use your experience, but that is what we call core infrastructure. Doesn't matter who is in charge, and it doesn't matter if they go away, it still works. That's what Bitcoin is. Satoshi, most likely, from what I've seen on YouTube at 3:00 in the morning, deep in the rabbit hole, he died in 2013. All the email thread, all the patterns, wallets with billions of dollars that I've never really touched, most likely he died in 2013. But even if he didn't, he did superb work, always staying pseudonymous, never creating a cult around him or herself. And Bitcoin works. Sure, there are core contributors and the network it is maintained.
Yeah, it's still big. It functions.
Even if we were to look at something like the Ethereum EVM and validators. Validators contribute to decentralization, but if a validator fails, it doesn't take the network down. So you have a team running a validator because someone has to do it, but it's not a single point failure. Beautiful tangents, by the way. Ludium.
Yes.
Why education?
So yeah.
Why Web3?
I want to go there with the little retrieval from the previous conversation that you mentioned. I think that
cancel the 12 meetings. We're going for 6 hours.
But yeah, it goes hand in hand. Like the decentralization aspect that I was mentioning that we were just discussing, I believe that is integral to every system. Like the current democracy as we know them was supposed to be that way. If any system, if its foundation or founding fathers, unless I'm mistakenly wrong about the entire document, it is supposed to be that way, but it just lost its track as it progresses on.
What are the assumptions that the foundation document makes? Because there's a bunch of them. Some explicit, some implicit.
Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Since the American independence, that's what I mean by it. And the democracy and the aspect, as the system develops and evolves with the Congress and the Senate and the voting system and the electoral votes and like the whole things. For example, I'm basing this off of Tocqueville's Democracy in America. I really love that book, by the way. The word decentralization comes from, if not that book, at least during that era. And the driving force of American democracy, as Tocqueville puts it, or the strength behind it, is the township and the vibrance of the election and how it, through interest, the seat can change so frequently that the power will not be centralized. That was one of the arguments that he makes. And he argues, it's really funny because that really rings a lot of bell to blockchain decentralization. The people think it's unsteady and like very fragile and very fickle and interest oriented to an extent, but it works because it moves forward at all times. Anti-fragility, as we talk about it, it was one of the key factors in the beginning of the modern democracy as we see it, probably during Renaissance or like probably during any new historical period that we've seen. So from there, it's hand in hand with why Ludium is doing education. When we're doing Web3, education in general is about self-sovereignty, is about liberty, and is about how to think about yourself and what you want to do, where you want to go based on it. By touching on Web3, as I was mentioning, Web3 or crypto or blockchain is probably the last resort or the last societal or the beginning of the new societal linchpin where those thoughts are most vibrant. And that is where we can go back to the values that we adhered to, maybe lost, and retrieve it back. That's how I see Web3. So by touching on Web3 education, we're mostly doing an occupational thing. What I hope is that I don't want Web3 or blockchain to be another revolution in that will go back to, as you're mentioning about the age, become the conservative holdback that we've seen. I just don't want that. And for that reason, I believe thinking and being able to think on your own is very important. And maybe I will fail. It's a very grave task and I'm not very I don't know if I'm qualified or good at it in any aspect, but I will certainly try to my utmost strength to be that way. That's why I'm doing Ludium and that's why I'm doing education.
I thought you just wanted money from foundations.
I know, right? As always. I'm probably going to put up a proposal through DevHub near social. I was talking to the developer hub people about the hackathon.
The work for justified work, not just like foundation rating.
No, just to rip them off, of course.
Foundation rating. Okay, no, I think we're onto something good here. So there would be some principles that I would probably summarize or distill from Buidl's work and everything that's been reached over the last 200 years. And then we could probably use that as almost as a prompt if we had to distill what are the Web3 principles. Once again, some are stated explicitly, this in some ecosystems, such as Ethereum, really doing Bitcoin. Some are implicit by what we do, and they both evolve over time. So if we were to look at the first principles of the American founding documents, there's actually several very interesting threads that are weaved in a masterful way to achieve perfect balance. The first one is big government bad. This is a time when they're breaking all British Empire. They're like, why the fuck are we paying tax with king elsewhere? For historical context, these are English people breaking off from England. Like the notion of Americans didn't really quite exist in the same way back in the day. So they're breaking off from an overarching monolithic institution that basically suppressed people for its own interest. The second point will be that you need to have many counterbalancing points. And you probably looked at both in the division of powers at the federal level, judiciary, legislature, etc., but also within the state and within the councils in the states. And that comes with giving each one of them very specific powers. This is what you can do. You cannot go beyond that. Some of the most interesting examples in modern days would be something like marijuana being illegal federally, but some states legalizing it. So within the state, it can be done. Perhaps more controversially, something like migration being a federal, but some states choosing to basically not enforce it. So there's a very interesting counterbalancing force. There's a bit of, I think, healthy competition. If you were to look at the New York, California, and Texas, or
supposedly at least,
I don't know.
I'm reluctant to say whether it is preserved to the level that it was intended to this day. To be honest, that's one of the America's biggest problem that I see.
Oh, 100%. And that's why it's always important to make the point that these things are a constant flux, because one of the mistakes that people make most often is to think that things are stagnant, or the way that they are now, it's the way that they're always going to be. The most interesting one to me is delegated democracy. The document also assumes and acknowledges that everyday people are not in a position to lead a government, be it because of the time commitment it takes, expertise, knowledge, whatever the case may be. So people elect, in theory, the best person for the job. And if that one is not able to do it, they need to get the fuck out. And if you spread that thinking across every branch, local, state, federal, different institutions, then you inevitably have the best people in every single position keeping each other accountable. Clearly not happening.
Not quite what it is.
Yeah, we don't have to go too deep into it, but I think that people without trying too hard would be able to identify that perhaps having the same person for 38 years in the same role or across roles will probably be seeing out in some up and coming talent that bringing some fresh ideas and energy. So this brings us to Web3. What are those driving principles, right? I've been very vocal since before the collapse of T's potentially creating the wrong culture, or it bringing a new people that are just not aware of what we actually stand for. And the argument at times that maybe it's good, like a Trojan horse, focus on the weird shit here, will build the real infrastructure. But it'd be more a question of, what do we want Web3 to be there for? What are the people that we want to attract now? If I hand over the mic to you, because this may be relevant in answering the question, in defense of conservatism, I don't think that it is a resistance to doing new things. Conservatism is actually quite the opposite. Conservatives are against doing the same thing that they already did 50 years ago and that they know it doesn't work. And it's almost like a stronghold against I want to call it ignorance, or like the youth fervor to ignore history and just do the same thing over and over again. And I see it at university campuses. I was in Australia, which is like a smaller version of the US, and it wasn't as crazy back in the day. But I had many conversations about socialism with university students in Australia, most very wealthy in the university. And I'm like, I grew up in Venezuela. Like every argument, I had real life experience, and I could map out how that policy looks in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and the second, third, and fourth order effect. These idiots were basically stoned, wearing brand clothes, driving a fucking Audi to university, and wanting to rebel against their parents because they feel guilty for having a trust fund. So fuck that. In that case, I'm like, sure, we want to block progress, we'll block it because it's not progress, it's going backwards. If you look at real progress, like technology, I don't think that you'll find strong opposition against that kind of progress. AI perhaps is the exception now because it's so new and could be so meaningful. But in general, we don't have Luddites in government now, for instance. So anyway, principles for Web3.
So conservatism, as you were mentioning, I would say is taking courage. And I use the word courage in context to Plato's Republic. In Plato's Republic, Plato describes courage as taking steps to preserve what you need to guard the city. So it's the Republic is the whole thing about guarding the city and guardians taking the preservation. And the word preservation, I think, is really important in the sense that what are you preserving and why are you preserving that for? I guess one way of using analogy would be being a good father. I haven't been a father yet, but being a good father, I guess, is doing the best for your son and to take care of him or her
Or they,
or them
or them.
or whichever. So yeah, and I guess I don't think it's a conservatism unless you're doing it for as you're saying, principle of the protocol, because if it was set up with the decentralization foundation and self-sovereignty or any other values or user experience, scalability, those are what you need to preserve. Preserving means you got to bring more people into it. You got to invite more people. And then for that, I mean, the reason why I got into your ecosystem is because I met you during last year, during Summer House, you remember? The DSRB Summer House. I've been in crypto for 7 years, 6 years. I heard about Near, heard about Solana, but I wasn't really open to it. I didn't know that. I didn't know what the technological steps there are. And layer ones usually tend to be a scam anyway. So why do I waste time looking at it to begin with?
It's a really good point. And as you said, it became clearer to me. Conservatism, or at least a faction of it, there's other more religious side. But if you were to look at mostly the economic wing of it, it's actually about bringing back to attention the core problem for which the solution was created. And this is a twisted logic. If the solution worked, that problem no longer exists.
Yep.
They're saying we cannot change the solution that was put in place because then the problem will come back. If you look at something like corporations law, trust law, taxation, business environment requires very stable, predictable environment. When you want to deploy a lot of money, hire people, etc., these are things that can't be changed out of the whim. If we were to get to some specific example when it comes to blockchain, things like Bitcoin being fixed at 21 million. I don't think it is a Bitcoin maxi or everybody that would say, don't change it, because Bitcoin is issued with a fixed supply, 2008, in the midst of the financial, we've had at least 2, if not to some extent since, even now. So it's crazy to have a 90-year-old say, fuck it, let's just change it and make it the same as Ethereum. Very different. And even Ethereum, it introduces a burn mechanism to make up for the fact that it doesn't have cap supply. So you can actually come up with very different and competing solutions. I'm actually not fixed one or the other. What I am fixed on is once you choose a path, you have to stay true to the course. Another example, near validators. Hard time. Most of them are not making any money right now. And there's been some validator groups wanting to introduce some protocol changes, including one they call UBI or some bullshit. They want validators with more delegation to receive less stake. And I was like, this is short-term thinking.
Mhm.
Because if news goes back to $20 in 1 year time, you're all minting money. In the meantime, you're threatening an entire market economy here, which, by the way, even Ilya has weighed in very lightly, saying, hey, Polkadot has that. And all it does is the big validator simply spins out as many validators as it needs to be on the threshold. And guess what that does? It pushes out the small validator because we've got limited capacity. So this is why I'm always very adamant on focusing on the problem and then trying to match out the potential solutions. That because I'm a lawyer and not an engineer. But yeah, there's always like third order effects. Now, this brings us to the Korea thesis. Can you give us an overview of the Web3 landscape in Korea and even what it is today? And this should be a segue to ETH Seoul and how Near has been growing in the ecosystem. And maybe a couple of pointers. I've identified from last year some very big players such as Clayton that were unknown to me until it came into Korea. This year, an example would be Chroma. Up north is some very large infrastructure providers. DSRV is a great example. And in general, it's a very robust market, but it can be a little bit isolated where some people overseas may not really understand what's happening there. The Luna collapse may have also have some impact in the local market. So yeah, if you could just place us into Korea today, how is it different from other Asian countries? Why should people pay attention about what's happening here?
Koreans are very quick-tempered and very yeah, they're very quick-tempered.
They don't show it.
They're very quick-tempered. They're just like on time of it. You were saying you're diligent. You're being by the virtue of being diligent. That means you're always on foot. So you're just like constantly exuberating or
just associate quick-tempered more maybe with his action. Fuck yeah.
Oh yeah, not in that, but very fickle.
Yeah. Okay.
Very fickle in terms of like their choices. They sway a lot, and then the reason for them to sway is based on certain authorities. They are very delegated to trust. It's ironic. Even in Web3, it's still there. For example, celebrities but celebrities they know, not like Mark Twain or no, even Mark Twain did.
Long time.
Yeah. So,
we're referring to like proxy validation.
Yes, proxy validation. That's a big thing in Korea. And depending on that, and they're going to be very quick tempered. But at the same time, when the proxy validation is like trust is once there, they become very steadfast to that trust, like source of the trust at least.
Would you define that steadfastness, sure of the word, as loyalty or more around the ability to execute and just being very efficient towards that goal? Or both?
I would say loyalty more so because I mean I was describing more in terms of the entire landscape rather than a specific kind of landscape because there would be investors and there will be builders and there will be other people who are just tourists.
Hopefully users.
Yeah, hopefully users. It's great that you mentioned users because I don't see there is a tangible Web3 application, not only in Korea, but globally, that is reaching a user market fit like level. Like to be honest, because Uniswap, I love Uniswap and MetaMask and what other DeFi services or whatnot. Those are only for crypto oriented products. It's by the virtue of being financed. You're moving around crypto assets. I don't really see them as users, but they're more like Web3 people products.
We obviously never stick to the agenda, so fuck it.
Yeah.
Korea thesis by.
Yeah, anyway.
Look,
I'll come back to it.
We'll come back to it. I think it's a really interesting point because the podcast is very aptly called Wild User Interviews. And the idea is to talk to people leading in their fields and then blast it out so that more people can like get insights on that area. I agree with you. Web3, if you were to look at the adoption curve, we're still in the innovators category.
I think so.
And maybe we've got some early adopters, which happen to be the builders or the people that are passionate about technology. And it's very important to acknowledge that because that then forces us to think how to move it
beyond,
how to move the lever forward. And I used to say 2 years ago that crypto had a big problem because the investors, the builders, and the users were the same people. And if you think about
unfortunately, yes,
that is the worst possible scenario to have because looking into the balance of power of government, or even of Web2, your investors are what keeps you in check. Projects,
supposedly, yes.
Projects that run right.
Yeah.
Even if investors are dickheads and negligent and corrupt, or whatever the case may be, if you run out of money, that's the end of the project. And investors will look at what you're doing, sure, but they will look more so what they should be at the user side. Have you validated the product? So it's not really the vision that you have. The vision is great, but you built to work. Your vision and the product design are very different. Like the product is meant to evolve based on the feedback from the users. And if you and I here create a fantastic idea, we've had many good rants about potential products, that is like a -3 rough draft. We're going to consistently put it in front of people.
And then people gotta have those who actually are going to use it and have say on it. That's what beyond Web3, that's what products are built. Just in general. Yeah.
You're going to get
this microphone is probably built that way.
100%. Even if we use this microphone and we had to Google before how to use it, it's got 4 settings, which address specifically the 4 user types identified. They've got the one where it's just a front for a solo podcast or streaming. They've got one which is bidirectional, like we're doing now, 2 people sitting across from each other. They've got one that's better for instruments and like acoustics. And they've got a setting for omnidirectional. So it records the entire room
or something like that.
for a group of people.
Yeah.
It must have been a lot of user research to identify who spends hundreds of dollars on a microphone and how can we tweak the settings of the mic to appeal to each one of those people.
Exactly.
And then you communicate that very clearly. Who am I? What do I want to use it for? I'll go to the website and it shows me some dude that looks stunning in a professional podcast studio. The reality is it's going to be me in a fucking basement with my perfect mic. But
at any rate, the product building.
So if I were to apply these to Web3, this is what drew me to Near because I saw Near at the time it was the only blockchain. I was talking about product or experience. These days, maybe Aptos and Sui have that same product think, although they're much earlier stage. And it's hilarious because even though Near had that vision and I started working toward that vision back in the day, we were so early. There were some indications there that they were definitely way ahead of the curve and putting the work into the money with the mouth was things like the account model and even the Near wallet.
The account model is now being talked as account abstraction and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, but if you were to compare what we had back in the day with the tech stack that we have now, and when I say now, I'm talking like even the last 2 months, there's been some major particle upgrades, and transactions, pass tools, etc. Key takeaway is I 100% agree with you that there aren't many real world applications. My contention would be we just didn't have the tech before. So the challenge that we have now, both from the education side, which is where you're at, and the propaganda side, which is where I am, we need to acknowledge the shortcomings of the past and the grievances of everyone except Gary Gensler. Yes, it is true. It was expensive. It was slow. It was friction. It looked like dog shit. It might have been a bunch of 16-year-olds jerking each other off. But as the technology evolves and improves, we really need to be able to invite vendors to do more. So this brings us back to the Korea thesis.
Yeah. So
why has crypto had such a good penetration here, even though it is very early stage? And what could we potentially do here to
recruit or so the quick temper and the delegation of authority that I was mentioning that because like in all markets, there's also a stage of a market that in the beginning, it was investors. People were just investing and it was just about coin flipping. And that was the vast majority in Korean market, I'm saying. But
the interesting thing though, even though coin flipping may be giving us some legal leverage these days, early stage, and this is why it is so important to identify the stage of the market, validation are the investors. Somebody has to believe that this can grow to want to support it financially. Think about it like a Kickstarter. It is not an investment because you want to make money, because that's how you probably make money. Any other number of assets, but you buy into the idea, into the philosophy, and you want to support it. The movement needs money to grow.
For example, that you're talking more in terms of the beginning of the Bitcoin. For example, like the Bitcoin before 2013, Ethereum before 2017, like the whole altcoin, like the developers were actually like early advocates of Ethereum. They spun off like consensus or stuff like that. So the foundational standpoint, I think you're right. But in terms of the market, more people, user side of things, people usually start with more as a coin bot because 90%, not everyone, of course, but 90% that I know come to this world by buying a shitcoin. Most likely a shitcoin, probably less likely to be a Bitcoin. Because anyway,
this is why I love this conversation, because there's a self-selection bias. See, I was about to say the opposite. Most of the people that I know, or at least most of the people that I know that have actually made money,
right?
No one ever bought Bitcoin because they thought they were going to make money.
Yeah.
They bought Bitcoin because they subscribed to the ideology. And it was that belief, same for Ethereum, same for other coins,
Right.
ideally some of the altcoins now. It was that belief in the vision and their commitment to engineering and the code and the utility to stand for itself and solve problem to people. That's why they help.
Yeah.
For pretty savage bear markets. And before you know it, a small investment over 10 years time, now they have something that is worth money, but it's not really, it's almost like the universe is rewarding you for staying true to the cause and for working towards something that is worthwhile. Sure, some people make money with Bitcoin. The vast reality is it's not that many.
Yeah.
Way more people lose money than make. And honestly, Bitcoin should probably get regulated, because I can see how every time we have this like hype cycle, we actually move backwards on the adoption curve, because most really users fucking hate Bitcoin and they hate the ape NFTs.
I don't even know what it means to be a user of Bitcoin, to be honest, but it goes along with your point.
Probably IP related. So IQ.
Anyway, so let's get back to the point. Yeah, as you're mentioning, the reason why I'm mentioning is that I agree that I came in with that kind of mindset, and like I personally believe funny story. I didn't make a wallet until 2021, until I started Ludium and started educational institution, because I liked crypto. I was immersed into the whole thing about it, but I wasn't fully devoted to it. And I don't touch something that is not mine. When Ludium decided as an organization that we're going all in Web3 education, and we started as NFTs, but Web3 education, that's when we started to feel that, then as an educator or as one who's delivering the message, I must know how to use all this. That's why I made my first MetaMask. So I'm that kind of person.
This is probably a really good segue to ETH Seoul and just near protocol in general. I want to ask you about ETH Seoul. I witnessed something very strange.
Well, it's strange. Right?
Very unique at ETH Seoul this year. I feel like there were more near speakers, MCs, and hackers than Ethereum.
Yeah, it was actually. It was, yeah, because as I said, Koreans are not biased in that way, because they are willing to accept to the new authority. If they're the most simple example for it is that Near put the most bounty on it. They put the most bounty on any trap, which is in a sense could be controversial, but at the same time that drive to people to see that, oh, Near is interested in our ecosystem. Near is actually trying to do something.
But always let's unpack it. The bounty, which even I joined the hackathon for the first time in my short life. I loved it.
Yeah.
The bounty was literally anything towards mass adoption. And the reason why I think this is worth highlighting is because bounties can sometimes be very restrictive, because they're very inward. It's about me as a particle. You build something using my technology. And if that's a premise, you almost have to shift your ideas to suit the bounty. And over time, protocols probably figured out that they're handing over a bunch of money for ideas that are not bad, but may have been artificially constrained and shaped to fit the bounty. And then there's no interest in continuing working with it. This is the point of the podcast. Why people should do more user research. Why are these builders not interested in pursuing these ideas? You'll be contrasted with a near bounty. Allowing people to build anything with a mass adoption mindset automatically shifts from us and our technology to you and your idea. People should have spent most of the time thinking about their users and who are they going to serve.
I think there is a fine balance between the two. It depends on who your target audience is. Like for those who are newly onboarding to Near, if they have already expertise in their business or like in their code skills and if they're just good entrepreneur in general, like without being Near or not, that I think suffice. That would probably be suitable for them to, build your own dApp. You can do whatever. We'll give out the hackathon prize. I think that suits. But right now in Korea, how I feel about it is that there aren't that many people who are used to near technian. So there is a fine line between the guidance and the liberty. So at least, like, for example, if you want to use BOS, you got to know what BOS is and then be able to use the libraries and be able to search them, and then giving out small prices for at least figuring them out and be able to do something on it that will give developers some kind of a time or some kind of a skill that are required to utilize the technology. And then I usually believe that developers can make the services, but it shouldn't be the problem for developers to make services. It should be the service providers or user researchers or those who are actually going to be the entrepreneurs that gotta make the ideas. So
you're 100% correct, but this is making a strong case for, hear me out, Gary, that diversification and understanding the role that many different actors play in a truly decentralized ecosystem. If I am Lidium Foundation or Proximity, I come in and I say, I don't give a fuck who does it. Here's $10,000. Build me something in 48 hours. Mm-hmm. And obviously, with that strong incentive in place, which we hope that stays there, then we could say, okay, if I know that there will be opportunities for Koreans to participate in these events, get money, which for 48 hours, it's a pretty good price, and potentially continue to expand, then we start to reverse engineer, okay, what are all the current gaps in the market? Some of these are Web3, tech stack, maybe Rust, maybe JavaScript, maybe the notion of a blockchain operating system, BOS, as you mentioned. Some of these are actually Web2. Product thinking, trying to identify a problem and just a research journey. Right. There's a lot of things that you can definitely try to unpack, and each different service operator or community can focus on a different thing.
Exactly.
So I think that it's a good, and it was very interesting to see it in the wild. And the reason why I keep highlighting it is I've been to a lot of hackathons all over the world, and I am often introducing or pitching the near stack. Up until recently, it was hard. There was no differentiation, or there was no strong enough differentiation that was easy enough to understand for people to give a shit. But now it feels like we've finally reached a new era where the user experience, not just for the end user, but for the developer themselves, that's starting to make a difference. How would you, going back to last year, DSRV House, what do you remember? Like, how would you describe what I was doing last year in Korea?
I was intrigued how easy it is to set up a wallet, because I know EVM system and I know the seed phrase and all the kind of stuff, and made a wallet. It should have pulled up for me.
But describe it step by step. Like you're standing here and you see me across the room walking towards. What happened step by step?
Yeah, you walk towards me and you ask me, do you want to pull out? Do you want to near? Pull? You didn't even say near, you want to pull out. And I was like, okay, what do I, like, how do I receive it? Because it's a EVM user. I was like, do I need to give you my public key, or what are you talking about? And, you can do it in 3 seconds, and then you give me your phone. I'll give you the link. And then you gave me the link, and then click setting up from setting up the wallet to treat the wallet. It was a smooth experience. It was mind blowing for me.
Yeah.
That's what you're getting to, right?
It's funny because I didn't know before I started recording that you came into the near ecosystem through that. So last year, we were using the Satori tech stack. At the time, Satori has since gone in a different direction, but Keypalmer has very much taken over that space, and now it's like more powerful. But at the time, Satori Creator Studio enabled me to issue any number of NFTs, and the POAP functionality was super cool because I would open up my laptop, half the screen would be the QR code, which immediately takes people to the create wallet and redeem page. And there would be a code on the other side of the screen. So you must be at the event to get the code that refreshes every 30 seconds. Very similar to a Google Authenticator. So I walked around basically all of the DSRV house. And at the time, I felt very out of place and very naughty boarding people to near at an Ethereum event. And everybody having the same reaction, very favorable. Everybody except two the VCs that did not invest in near were raised. And they literally refused to take it. They made hypotheses in their mind and they just shut off to it. But it was very grueling work, walking around with a bloody laptop, but it was very satisfying. And I'll see if I can find some of the photos and some of the videos from last year. People would basically create, choose your own name or your name.near. And yeah, in just 3 clicks, while it creates. At the time, you still have to save your private seed phrase, private screenshot. Although I told people to at the time, one of the selling points was that you can replace your private key. And how recently you should have YouTube video how to do it. So even if you were doing it on the go, less secure way, it's pretty cool that you can replace your private keys. Some technically minded people really like that. And then there was a power. So I thought that was really cool. And yeah, in hindsight, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of effort to promote a tech stack that was super young.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe in 1 year time, I'll think the same how we're doing now.
Yeah.
But it's just incredible how much it has advanced.
Yeah. And what I really like about the recent year, the one year after, now I'm doing education on Near. And now the reason why I got more immersed into Near is that those tech stacks are ready to be used by the developers. And I believe if those are rightfully distributed and be readily handed over to them, I think they can build more Legos out of it and do some crazy shit. I actually proposing many thoughts to Developer Hub and trying to devise workshops and educational program and all that kind of stuff for them. From there, I believe that not just handing over the POAP, but at least more importantly, handing over the means to deliver those POAPs is ready. Giving that opportunity to developers
on that journey. I guess what I really want to stress to get the insights is you've been organizing ETH Seoul for 2 years now, which is mostly Ethereum based. Right. Ethereum ecosystem is extremely welcoming. You engage with many other ecosystems. I want to learn more about that journey of doing this work, starting with Ethereum ecosystem, EVM, and the journey into Near. Specifically, some of the docos that you shared with me talk about some of the previous education workshops that you have done, VM-based services, and some of the early wins that you have already had within the Near ecosystem, including education or training for the winner, and hackathon, and other opportunities that are shaping up in the local ecosystem. So yeah, if you could just take us along that journey, that would be great.
I first started with Bitcoin, obviously, in 2017. So that was the only thing that I was interested. I wasn't really interested in Ethereum at the time. I saw a lot of ICOs coming in. And I met some of them, like Gnosis and Agwn people. Like when they first came to Korea, I met them and I talked to them, and then they were interesting people. So that got me interested. But the year that I really got into Ethereum was 2021, which is right before the boom and the next cycle. The whole notion of smart contract was interesting, but we've only recently started dev education program. We've actually started with a non-dev education program, like the basics of what crypto is and how all these Web3 works and stuff like that.
I went to Ludium website and I tried looking at all the community created content, which seems to be a very rich source of information, but there is a language barrier.
Yeah. Right now we're focused on Korean community. I mean,
look, to be honest, sometimes these are the regional communities that make me bullish because it makes sense to have everything in the local language.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go to countries and I was like, why is everything in English? When it's English.
We are, if we get the right amount of initiatives, we are trying to, translating isn't that difficult. It just takes money and time. That's it. I know translators and then I can paint them and then translate them, but it's not like a priority for us at the moment because we don't have a user base.
The only very tiny segue, and I mentioned this to the Open Web Academy in Mexico. I speak Spanish, so I can see what they're doing. But also as the grant issuing body, marketing DAO at the time, I have to relate to the council with the impact that they're having. And because of the website and most of the work is in Spanish, it may be harder to convey.
I understand.
Yeah, it's always good to be able to project to the world what's happening. Yeah. Even if it is maybe a grant or maybe a source of inspiration for other regions. Personally, going back to Australia with a very strong Korea model and a lot of ideas for things to do there.
That really speaks back to what you were saying about ETH Seoul. ETH Seoul is inherently a global event. Like it's part of the Buidl, and Erica is doing a wonderful job. Is trying to build a presence of builders in Korea to gather around. That's why not only I, but the whole Ludium was working with her. And as a part of that, it was very interesting for me to see how Builder presence is growing through Near, but not only Near, but also other chains as well. So I don't know if the multi-chain is ever at its door or not, because the whole tech stack that I've seen about multi-chain was like funky for me. But at the same time, it is coming to a time where each chain, other than EVM or other than Ethereum or layer two, so we say, are coming to its own presence and trying to show what they're capable of. And Near, as a developer friend hub, has a great opportunity for the newly onboarded developers that I am trying to teach. And I'm just trying to it's purely out of an economic decision for me, because like with without even the bounty or anything, I believe you can be a Solidity developer, but unless you're already like 3 years head start, it's going to be very hard for you to invent a new idea that's going to be like the next Uniswap, the next Blur, or the next whatever. But on Near, I think you have more chances. That's what I see in Near from the perspective of developer. They probably won't know it, but I think that's true. So that's why I chose Near education rather than any other.
The several things that are new, or I guess could be identified as an area of opportunity. This is my perception, so let me know if you agree or disagree with any of them. I guess the first one would be Rust. What I often tell people is that Rust as a language is very young as well. Ethereum and Rust actually were born up at the same time,
Which is very interesting.
I suspect that the Italian got the choice and he were to launch Ethereum today. Most certainly will be written in Rust. Every other modern layer one, including Solana, Aptos, Sui, etc., are written in Rust. So just that, it's a very interesting scenario where, regardless of what people choose to build ultimately, because different use cases may suit different chains, identifying Rust as a very big, early growing market, huge. The other one is that Near actually enables you to write smart contracts in JavaScript.
We're actually teaching that.
So just that creates a very unique, huge market for tapping into millions of people. I think it's 100 million people that write JavaScript. And for them to start doing so in a smart contract, which kind of taps into the third category of inviting people to reimagine what can be built in Web3 with this new tech stack. And that may even involve growing to people that may have had idea for years. The idea itself is not new. We may go back even to like the Sims and the Metaverse and the weird couch in the beginning. Weird couch I mentioned at the beginning. These ideas are not particularly new or novel. It's just that the technology was not there. So once again, it's almost going back to the beginning and saying, okay, now that we have the core infrastructure, let's build. And every piece along the way, education is key.
We're trying to have that presence and at least start with Korean local community. Although it is isolated, I would like to bridge that because through these kind of events and through these kind of like tech stack, and at least coders, if coders can speak in English, they can at least speak in codes. It's not necessarily bad that it is isolated. And I've always been a strong proposer. And even now, I'm even a stronger believer in the world is going to show to the United States how decentralized crypto is, because the US may be able to kill its domestic crypto industry. It is not going to stop innovation around the world. And the message to Americans is, whether you choose to stay in the United States and get a whatever job at McDonald's, or whether you move to Dubai to escape your own shitty government, that's not the point. The point is local builders who give zero fucks who runs the SEC and what circus other countries are running. Local builders are going to take these tools, which are distributed, which are open source, which are available to everyone, and they're going to use them to solve local problems. No one should have the authority or has the authority to stop progress because they don't see any use for the technology. That's a bureaucracy that we have to reject. Yeah. If you already made money, if you're sitting in luxury, if you want to stay stagnant, the rest of the world is never going to stop. Like, we have real problems and real opportunities that we're going to size. I know that we're very short on time, so very quickly before we go,
briefly mentioned it. You've got some proposals coming over to DevHub. DevHub, for those that don't know, is the developer decentralized initiative on here. So there is scope for funding and supporting ideas. Can you give us a really quick overview of the sort of ideas or projects that you want to run in Korea and that you're seeking support from the Developer Hub? And maybe we could invite our listeners, the tens of millions of them, to drop by the Developer Hub. I'll put the links in the show note and they can express their support. Hopefully, after they listen to you for 2 hours,
They'll get a little more sense of what I'm looking for.
they'll believe you can be a good steward for the ecosystem. And
Yeah. The idea is just in it just is a series of mini-thons. So what that means is instead of a big hackathon, we're trying to have one mini-thon every end of a month. And then builders can join on workshops to every week. Well, let's say at the end of like the last week, September of say August, mini-thon starts. So until the September, every Saturday, builders can join and build and attend workshops and do their own thing and form a team and stuff like that and then on each marathon, there's going to be tracks that are, some are going to be more creative, but others we are requesting to be more focused based on let's say key pump stack or like a proximity boss or like a wallet abstraction or stuff like that are integral to the whole Neo ecosystem, but at the same time, giving enough tech tools and stacks for developers to build their own ideas. The idea of this is continuity instead of a spontaneity, because having that presence that's ongoing constantly, I believe, is more important for builders and to seek the opportunity to be able to see. Also, at the end of every month, I can at least expect 1K if I join this workshops and be able to like ship something or deliver something. As the time progresses on, if we have enough track records and see what results come out, I believe it can be diversified into design thon, idea thons, or even bigger families or stuff like that. But I wanted the final focus that I have is continuity. So there's got to be an education track ready, like just in place for people to continuously do it. And there's got to be workshop plays and like workshop that are going to happen every month.
I like it. We actually had a very interesting Twitter space conversation. The topic was decentralized governance. It has its challenges. And there were two camps. If you were coming at it from the purely decentralized governance side, people were, even at the time, this would have been October last year, they were a little bit disappointed or frustrated with the quality of things being funded. And there were the guys like, this is rubbish. Like, this is not moving the needle. Why are we spending funds for these things? And then on the other hand, there were two developers, very good developers, actually, core contributor developers. And what he was saying was that the developing journey is different. And if you want the ecosystem to succeed, we need to find a way to support developers, but we need basically room to fuck around and find out. How can we attract, train, and retain the best talent without expecting them to on the Facebook or day one? How can we have many experiments and many lessons and just keep adding to the common stack of knowledge so that with every new developer that comes, not only is it fun, because now there's like people that you can engage with, but also they can keep building on top.
Yeah, exactly.
That layer of value is extremely hard to quantify because we can see how we need it to eventually reach the unicorn. It's just harder to go out of the ways. So I personally like the proposal. I think that it strikes the right balance between continuous engagement, let's call it directed learning or focused learning. There's a community element to it. We'll definitely be in touch, but I think that this is a model that could definitely be replicated internationally.
I think so.
And this is everything goes in circles. Maybe it's just how that we've been going for too long. I would probably use these as validation. And maybe it's something that you could even include in the original proposal. Be like, hey, this is something that we've discussed with other community or other regional leaders, interest in them doing the same. So funding this proposal wouldn't really just be funding our work on the ground, our participants. We could build playbooks over time and then share them with others. So there's actually almost like two-lined tangible work that we will be doing and the work coming out of our community. But then there's a playbook.
People mad for how this were planned and how this could be executed in the next.
100%. And I can tell you as a up until very recently, decision maker in a grant making body, ideas are cheap and very few ideas are novel. Execution is fucking hard. Mini-thon, hackathon, gangathon.
Gangnam style.
It literally doesn't matter how you frame it.
Yeah.
The challenge is actually
Doing
getting it done. Like, I personally love ideathons, especially because they could be a really good way to reframe people's understanding of Web3, especially if you were to keep them at least the basics of the technology of what can be done. But yeah, any like actual tangible playbook that reduces that barrier for any other operator to just put in place. That's always been my message. Not everyone is suited to lead, identify the opportunity, create a hypothesis or an experiment, and then be able to execute on it, learn from it, try again. So when we do find those people, I think it's important to give them whatever they need, and then,
all right.
give them the money.
Yeah, and also if any other once it kicks off and goes a little bit, if there are any other new ecosystem like those were hip hop, for example, I was reading their thoughts, but I didn't really understand all of it. But at least like they seem to be providing some kind of tools for developers to build on top of it. So if they don't support all of it, at least like provide some kind of bounties on top of the already stack on that will be something that's congregating all these funds from different kind of resources, which will reduce some of the burdens for the developer help, but at the same time will be also comprehensive in terms of the events.
There are many interesting philosophical musings on who funds what. So for instance, Foundation has a ton near that is technically the community fund, and they're there to grow the ecosystem. And the best way to think about it is near should be transferred over to the people that help the ecosystem grow.
Exactly.
Especially when we look at decentralized governance, potentially voting to stake near part of the decentralization and ongoing decentralization, because it is decentralized now, Gary, is definitely rebalancing the ownership beyond early investors, core team, foundation, etc., to community contributors. So something like Keeper, they're in the process now to raise money because they are a project that will be operating as a project that provides a service. But you can also see how there's many different tiers and categories where it would make sense to put the community funds into it. Not because someone else couldn't fund it. If needed, probably other sources could step up. But it's when we ask the question, like, what is the best use for those funds? It must be distributed. So there I wouldn't be like, yeah, we've got a shit ton of near, give it to the people, helping us grow this. And
we'll see. All right. I officially late for the appointment, but
sir, we appreciate your time. We know it is not a very creative thing to be late.
that's fine. No.
This means a lot to us.
Thank you so much. Till the next time.
That's the end of another episode. As always, I just want to thank you for listening because, let's be honest, you are amazing. And I also want to remind everyone that everything contained in this episode is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast shall be construed as financial, medical, or any other type of advice, and you should always consult with licensed professionals before making any financial decisions. Make sure that you like and subscribe so that you stay up to date with the latest episode. We've got a steamy hot pipeline of guests that will keep you entertained right through the bear market. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.